Hi, everybody. Good evening. Welcome to Evoke Therapy Programs broadcast. I'm Dr. Brad Reedy. Today is Thursday, June 20th, 2024. Tonight, I'm going to be reviewing an idea that's largely based on a book by Thich Nhat Hanh, the Buddhist monk who passed away a couple of years ago, called Mindfulness and Psychotherapy. And I'm going to talk about really broadening the idea of mindfulness and meditation. And I think he makes this point throughout the book that we confine the idea of mindfulness and meditation to sitting quietly in the lotus position. And when we think about it, the act of mindfulness and the act of participating and facilitating psychotherapy have a lot of parallels. Along with that, tonight I'm going to be talking about some principles of Buddhism that he shares throughout his book. This is just an audio book taken from a series of lectures, and I'm going to share the ideas in Buddhism that I think have wonderful application to parenting, to marriage, to our relationships, to our mental health. Before I get into the content, the one thing I want to talk about tonight is finding you. If you're looking for a therapy accelerator, if you don't know what your work is, if you're wondering what's my part in the relationships in my life, what's my part in my own unhappiness, my own challenges in life, I can't think of a better way to spend your time and your resources than to attend an intensive like Finding You. I talk about it all the time. If you don't want to go to one of ours, email me and I'll give you the names of others that are like ours, because I just want you to understand that it's really about this kind of work. Finding You is a 5-day workshop where you participate in psychodrama. You go back and look at your history. Even if you've been in therapy, this could be a great therapy accelerator. I participated in my first kind of workshop like this after I'd been in psychotherapy with my current therapist for over 10 years. I was skeptical that it was going to offer me something new. And while some of the information wasn't entirely new to me, the experience of going back in a small group like that was so powerful that I wanted to find one or to create one that we could do that was similar to my process, to our process. The difference between ours, of course, is it's more clinically based in attachment theory. So the next offering is July 24th through 28th in Midway, Utah. Beautiful part of Utah. It's all included. You get picked up from the airport. You get dropped off back at the airport. All lodging, all food is included. There are a couple of spots left for this intensive. And if you want to invest in your marriage, if you want to invest in your parenting journey, your child, I can't think of a better way. I think it's about it's the equivalent of 5 days of therapy, but it's like 1 or 2 years worth of the therapy in terms of the outcome. So I'm going to start with something from Alan Watts. One of the things I did throughout this broadcast, or I did throughout this lesson, was I took ideas from other people that teach or that parallel the teachings of Buddhism, because I want to explain, like Thich Nhat Hanh does in this book, that Buddhism is made up of non-Buddhist elements, meaning that it comes from the truth wherever we find it, and that the principles in Buddhism really can be found in so many areas. It has so much overlap, and a lot of people think about it as a religion. And I'm going to talk about tonight how it's not really a religion, but it's about a way of being. This quote from Alan Watts goes like this. He said, "Problems that remain persistently insoluble should always be suspected as questions asked in the wrong way." And I think about that a lot in psychotherapy, that sometimes the questions we ask, specifically, what should I do? What's the right decision? And those are probably the most common types of questions that we get as psychotherapists. And the reason that those questions remain persistently insoluble is because they're questions being asked in the wrong way. We're thinking about the issue, the situation differently. Psychotherapy, from an attachment-based perspective, the evoked perspective, is not about what to do, but it's about becoming. It's about being. Really, Buddhism is more than a religion with dogma. It's a way of being. A Buddhist master was once asked to describe Buddhism and its dogma. And his response was, "We don't have dogma, we dance." It's a way of participating in the world. And one of the things that I talk about constantly during these broadcasts is that you might hear some of the same ideas repeated over and over again from different perspectives. But really, I'm talking about a way of thinking, about a way of approaching something. And that's the way that this book talks about. That's the way that we think about the work here at Evoke Therapy Programs. Like I said, much of what I've taken for this presentation, this broadcast, is from the book by Thich Nhat Hanh. I have the picture of it up here. Mindfulness and Psychotherapy, working with anger and nourishing inner peace each and every day, especially for psychotherapists. This was taken from a group of lectures that he gave to psychotherapists years ago. He talks about this in many of his teachings and many of his writing. He talks about that there is no way to peace, but that peace is the way. And again, he's making a distinction that it's not about the destination. It's not about the outcomes. It's about the process of being in the moment. In psychotherapy, we think about the idea of it's the outcome of successful therapy. When I say to you, which I say constantly, probably to a level that it might annoy you, when I talk about the idea of doing your own work, whenever I get a question about parenting, that's always included somewhere in my answer. The outcome isn't that you'll get the answer that you're looking for. You'll change the question. The outcome of psychotherapy is who you become in the process. And I think even we psychotherapists sometimes think about the idea is to get the client to understand this, or to get the client to see this in their life. And really, it's about a transformation that happens. Joseph Campbell calls the process of differentiation, the process of individuation, the process that he describes in the hero's journey. It's about becoming your most authentic self, your truest self, your highest self. Like I said, that I was going to speak to this. Thich Nhat Hanh said, "There's a misconception that Buddhism is a religion, and that you worship Buddha. Buddhism is a practice," he explains, "like yoga. You can be a Christian and practice Buddhism. I met a Catholic priest who lives in a Buddhist monastery in France. He told me that Buddhism makes him a better Christian, and I love that. One of the differences between, or an understanding within the concepts of Buddhism, is the focus on the Buddha is to embody the Buddha, right? I met somebody, actually, now that's a part of my family, from Ethiopia, who practiced a type of Christianity. And she said that the biggest challenge when she moved to the United States, when she was adopted, was that in the United States, the way that people practice their religion didn't line up with what they professed. That the religions here were about what you say you believe in, what you say you accept. Where she comes from, the version of Christianity that she lived in her home country of Ethiopia, it's an embodiment. It's a way of being. The profession of what you believe is far less important than if you live and breathe the practices. And I would bet that everybody, people of faith and people that might even be critical of faith, would believe that that idea of embodying it is important in the spiritual practice of any religion. Mindfulness, as he explains, is to be present in the moment. Enlightenment is to be present with what is real. To have all of the distractions, all of the things that block us seeing the truth, removed from our vision, and to be able to see. In our program, in our wilderness program, people ask, what does the therapy look like? And really what it looks like is you ask a child when they get upset, when they snap at one of their peers, you ask them how they feel. And often their first response, you'll recognize this response, is to respond with something like, nothing, I'm fine. Or he or she or they were just being a jerk. And then we ask the question again, yeah, but how are you feeling? It seems like you've had this feeling for a long time, and it's not just this incident. And we ask the question again gently. And eventually the person learns that what they're feeling becomes manifested in their behaviors, their reactions. In a very simple way of describing the process of psychotherapy, it's to sit with somebody long enough that can see you compassionately, non-judgmentally, so that you can see yourself more clearly, so that you can get to a point where the ego is somewhat disintegrated, to the point where who you are, what you do, your faults, your problems, your reactions, your responses, your trauma history, your themes of mental illness, whatever it is clear to you. Mindfulness is about seeing what is, about being present with what is. He starts off his lecture, and he talks about this in a couple of places in his books, about can you enjoy the non-toothache. He said the first thing that happens when you get a toothache is you become enlightened. because you are focusing on the toothache above all else. It is present in your mind. And he explains that the practice of mindfulness is to enjoy the non-toothache. I assume virtually all the people that are listening to me right now aren't experiencing a toothache. And if that's true, have you taken a moment to be grateful, to run your tongue along the inside and the outside of your teeth, and to be grateful for the fact that none of them are aching or hurting right now? That's what mindfulness is. You eat your food slowly and you taste it. You sit with somebody and you listen deeply to what they have to say, to what they seem to be feeling, what they're asking for, the message that they're communicating to you. In your moments of anger or sadness or fear, you sit with yourself quietly until you recognize what's coming up from you and where it comes from. And I've taken this idea, he doesn't exactly say this, but I talk about this, and when I teach, that psychotherapy becomes a kind of mindful talking. He explains that when you are mindful, it's not that you're doing the dishes thinking about the Buddha and meditating. You're doing the dishes and you're thinking about the dishes. You're thinking about what you're doing. You're present with what you're doing. You can be mindful, he explains, when you're changing a diaper, when you're walking, when you're eating, when you're listening to a friend. Psychotherapy then becomes a talking mindfulness. The therapist offers the questions. What are you feeling? What happened? What do you want? Why did you react that way? What came up for you? Who are you? And through the process of being asked those questions and answering those questions, we become more present than with what is in our lives. But because we have shame, because we have guilt, because we have judgments, we don't want to be who we are. We want to deny who we are. My therapist tells the story of visiting her grandchildren recently. And there was some incident, there was a birthday party. I think one of the children, her grandchild was turning 5 years old, and some other 5-year-old showed up to the party. And at some point after the new 5-year-old entered the room, he said to the 5-year-old whose birthday it was, he said, "You're a poopy head." And then the 5-year-old said, "No, you're a poopy head." They went back and forth several times. And my therapist shares this story to illustrate that's what most of our discussions are about. They're about, I don't want to be the bad one. I want the problem, the issue to be out there, outside of me, in the other person. I'm not unhappy. My child is making me unhappy. I'm not sad or anxious or depressed. It's my child's behavior. And if I can fix that thing outside of me, if I can change my child's drug use, my child's self-harm, my child's school refusal, I will then be okay. And that really is the definition of a trauma response. When we aren't sat with, if you will, when a parent can't soothe us, be present with us, listen to us, see us, co-regulate with us, right? Offer their regulated nervous system as a place, an experience where we can relax. When that doesn't happen enough, we don't find safety in ourselves. And thus, the only way that we can experience the sense of safety, the sense of well-being, is to control the outside world. So then we have children, and at a certain age, at different ages, they start to display symptoms and issues. I'm not going to even get into where those issues come from, but they start to display issues. And any loving parent will experience some initial distress at those issues. And of course, the children that end up in our program display significant issues. And the parent's response is, if I can fix this child, if I can make this child feel better, if I can make this child's symptoms go away, then I will be okay. That is the response when you don't have a secure attachment that you carry around inside of yourself. That is the definition of codependency. My definition of codependency is looking for solutions outside of us to solve an internal problem, the internal problem of distress. A really important idea in mindfulness and Buddhism is this idea of radical acceptance. To radically accept what is. sadness, grief, even anger, to accept and to sit with it, to understand it, to hold it with kindness and compassion, to acknowledge that we even have it. Most people won't even acknowledge that they're angry. We see that as we have judgments about anger, that it's a weakness or it's a deficit, or only unhealthy or mentally ill people, people that are weak or reactive are angry. Everybody feels anger. And through the practice of mindfulness and mindfulness and therapy, we can learn to sit with anger. We can learn to listen to it. It's really the repression of emotions that cause the mental illness, right? It's not feeling what we're feeling that causes the mental illness and the diagnosis. The symptoms then of our diagnosis, of our depression, of our anxiety, of our self-harm, of our substance abuse, all of those symptoms are messengers from the unconscious part of us that says there's something in here that's being ignored. I love the definition of addiction that Johann Hari offers when he said, addictive behaviors are an attempt to not be present in our own life. You see, it's the opposite of mindfulness. So radical acceptance it's not passivity, it's not doing nothing. It's just learning that there is going to be discomfort and pain and sadness as a part of our life as we go through the day, to attend to it, to listen to it, to nurture it, to not ignore it, repress it, and then act it out on the people that are around us. It's really this idea that the only way out of the issue, the feeling, is through the feeling. And in a very similar way, radical acceptance is similar to faith. Faith is this idea that the world or my higher power has a plan for me, that whatever happens is here for some purpose, some meaning, something to teach me. Radical acceptance, it offers the exact same idea, that whatever the universe is presenting to me, in me, with me, in my family, is here for me. I love this idea. I think about this all the time. Kobe Bryant was asked the question by a reporter once. He was asked the question, do you play to win, or do you play not to lose? Most people will tell you in sports psychology that athletes that play to win fare better than those who play not to lose. Playing not to lose creates a kind of a fear in the body, an anxiety response, and oftentimes performance can be compromised when we're playing not to lose. But when Kobe Bryant was asked the question, do you play to win or you play not to lose? He said, neither. I play to learn. And in that way of approaching it, if he did very well, if I have a good game, if I do something, I learn from it. I practice it more. I incorporate it. And if I lose in a given situation or a game, I learn from it and try to take those lessons and move forward. And I think that happens in parenting and marriage for the people that are doing their work. When you set up the game so that you can't lose, right? Kobe Bryant's approach to basketball set it up so there was no way that he could lose. Every opportunity, no matter what happened, was still a lesson for him. And in that way, he had shifted the whole paradigm so that he couldn't lose, so that everything was to his benefit. That's an idea of radical acceptance, is that the cure for the pain, like Rumi says, is in the pain. The way out is through. When I work with people that are stuck in grief, I encourage them to grieve more. It is the resistance to the grief that causes it to become stagnant and stuck. And eventually, like I described with the other symptoms, we will leak. Our unexpressed, unrecognized emotions will come out sideways. And because we all have a style or a pattern of a way of communicating and manifesting our unexpressed feelings, and those become a pattern, right? We have a pattern, a way of doing it that's our go-to. Those patterns then are organized in such a way that in the mental health manual, they're called diagnoses. That's all it is. And the reason that happens is because We don't know how. We haven't had the experience of learning how to, because we didn't have enough co-regulation. Essentially, I'm simplifying it a little bit. We don't know how to metabolize the feelings. They become overwhelming for us. And like I said, we either try to prevent or control something outside of us, or we'll do something that is we'll ingest a drug, alcohol, food, sex, something that will help us distract ourselves from the authentic suffering that Carl Jung talks about when he says that neurosis or mental health is a substitute for legitimate suffering. So really the therapist's job is to sit with the client in their unsolvable problems, to sit with them in and through their feelings. I thought, like most therapists thought when I became a therapist, that my job was to help people feel happy. That's what I thought my job was. And really, my job is to help people feel sad and angry and scared and all of their feelings, whatever they're feeling. And that's a big shift. My instinct still to this day, over 30 years into the practice of psychotherapy, is I want to take away people's pain and distress. I want to do it with my children. I want to do it with my wife. And when I feel that urge, that in psychotherapy, we call it countertransference. When I feel that countertransference, I have to remind myself that my job is to sit with it, to see the meaning in it, what it's offering, what it's communicating. Another idea from Buddhism that he talks about throughout this book is the idea of impermanence. I think impermanence is one of the most distressing ideas for most people. Impermanence means that nothing lasts forever. That everybody who is alive will die. That we will all die. That everything will evolve and change continually. That's the one thing that is constant, is that everything is dying and being born again. Feelings move through us. Sadness comes and goes. Tom Hanks, in an interview I've seen, maybe you've seen it, he said the one thing that he would say to his younger self is the idea that this too shall pass. But impermanence in Buddhism is an idea that when you accept, it makes every moment more joyful. I used to say to my now 16-year-old, when she was a little girl, when she was 5 years old, I would say to her sometimes, this might sound morbid and strange, but it came from this idea of impermanence. I said, everybody that we know and love will be dead in 100 years. What should we do about that? I would ask her. And she would say, let's talk about what was happy today. And I would say, that's a good idea. You see that the embracing of the impermanence, the acceptance of impermanence, of death, of change, led her back to the idea of being present in the moment and being grateful for the non-toothache in the moment. The idea of non-duality. You can't experience love without grief. You can't experience love without pain. The deeper your grief, the deeper that you have loved. Anger is not a bad thing. It's just a protective feature. It's energy in our bodies that, if we learn to listen to it, can help us go where we need to go. Our greatest strengths are right next to our greatest wounds. You know, I grew up without a father, and that's one of my great griefs in life, one of my great wounds. And I also find that the clients that I've worked with in my life, many of them, the ones that I was most able to connect to and to be present with, were those who didn't have fathers. My oldest daughter talks about feeling bullied by people and by her brother when she was growing up, and she says, that's also my greatest strength. I'm a protector of the underdog, right? Our greatest strengths, my ability to teach and to lead, is a great strength of mine. And it comes from the fact that I had to learn to manipulate the early life experience that felt unsafe for me. So in Buddhism, we don't, it's not thought of that there's evil and that's the bad part of life, right? It's that yin and yang, that symbol that we see from Taoism, similar. It's the idea that it's all connected. Your joy and your pain are connected. Thich Nhat Hanh said, Sometimes when we are sad, we lose contact with the fact that we are more than our sadness, that we can feel sadness, we can move through it, that it's an impermanent state of being. He goes on to say, so you see that the flower, this is from a famous story that's told many times about the Buddha standing in front of, I think it was 5,000 monks, maybe it was 500, I don't know the number, many monks, with a flower, just sitting there in silence, people waiting for him to speak. And eventually, there was one monk in the crowd that began to smile, a joyful smile at beholding the flower. In fact, I don't know the language, but that monk's name then became a name for flower arrangers, for people that arrange flowers, work with flowers. He could see the whole universe in the flower, that it took the soil, it took the sunlight, it took the water. The flower is made up of the entire universe, right? All of it comes together. When you eat mindfully, you eat a strawberry and you realize how many people, how much was put into that flower for it to arrive before you. So he says, you see the flower in the rubbish and the rubbish in the flower. And psychotherapy is the same way. The flower is not something to be afraid of. Excuse me, the flower is not afraid of the garbage. And the garbage does not think the flower is the enemy. Hatred and despair are like the garbage in us. We don't throw them out and get rid of them, because that's what makes the flower grow. We could be mindful of our anger. We can recognize it in us. It is energy. If you are angry about being angry, your anger is doubled and you suffer more. This is what he's trying to explain. Some of you already know this, that the struggle that your child is going through, what brought you to this broadcast, what brought you to this program. Maybe it was your marriage that brought you to this broadcast. Whatever it was, that this broadcast, that what you're learning, the joy that's rising up in your body as you learn these new principles, this new way of being, as you unlearn the way and the ways that you were conditioned, the ways that you were brought up, you become more free, you become more empowered. And what was it that brought all of this freedom, this joy, this awareness, this deeper and more profound love? Well, it was a struggling child. It was a marriage that was hanging on by a thread. A parent wrote a blog for us some time ago, and she wrote that it was the best gift that she ever had in her life, going through this process with her child. It was the best gift that she ever had, but it was wrapped in crappy wrapping paper, in the worst wrapping paper. The rubbish leads to the flower. So when you look at the flower, can you see the compost? Can you see the dirt, the mud, and the rain in it? And in Buddhism, they're not opposites. They depend upon each other. The flower will grow and will die, and then it will become the rubbish. So the idea in Buddhism, the idea in mindfulness, is that we see, I used to say this to parents when I was creating a parent group. I would say, if you can just for today, just imagine that you're not in the wrong place, that you're not off track, that this is exactly where you need to be. What is this day? What is this lesson? What is this broadcast tonight, or whenever you're listening to it? What is it speaking to you? What's its message? I know we want to get back on track. We think there's a right track to be on. This is your track. This is your lesson. Children come into our lives to show us the unhealed parts of ourselves, the immature parts of ourselves. Thich Nhat Hanh says that peace is boring to most people. That's especially true of adolescents. And if you participate in addictive behaviors, specifically drugs or anything that gives you a dopamine hit, it's even more true that peace is boring, that it's the rush, it's the thrill that excites us. And that's why children who are exposed to substances earlier on are wiring their brain for addiction. Their pleasure centers in their brain become desensitized to peace. When we get older, most of us find reading a book and sitting quietly as a joyful activity. That's not very joyful to a teenager. Their pleasure center needs a huge spike for them to feel a sense of well-being, excuse me. I told you the story of the Buddha holding the flower. Seeing the universe in the flower means that we see everything that makes up a flower. A flower is made up of non-flower elements: sun, water, soil, and nutrients. He explains that the only thing available to us is the present moment. And he explains that you can go back and change the past. He tells the story of a Vietnam veteran who, after losing hundreds of friends in a battle, that he poisoned and killed 5 children. He put poison in sandwiches and left them outside the gates of a city, and children came and ate them, and he watched them all die. And it was a great grief that he held on to. And through his process of working with Thich Nhat Hanh, Thich Nhat Hanh explained to him, you can change the past. You can change the meaning of it. He said there's a lot of children who are orphaned by war. There's a lot of children that are suffering. You can spend your life serving them so that this thing that happened to you now has a different meaning. Joseph Campbell explains that we're not so much what we're looking for. Well, this is from Viktor Frankl, actually. What we're looking for is meaning in our suffering. So what is the meaning in the suffering of watching your child struggle? What richness does it add to your life? And then it changes. You'll be inclined, when you embrace this idea mindfully, to someday say to your child, thank you. Thank you for waking me up. I'm sorry you had to struggle and suffer so much for me to see myself, to wake up to myself, to see who I was, to see what I've done to you, to see what my participation was in this dance. And I'm grateful, and I'm going to work on this. Regardless of whether or not you struggle and suffer, I'm going to work on this so that you don't have to suffer anymore to show me what I can't see, what I'm not mindful of. He explains that the nuclear physicist can look at a piece of dust with awe and wonder. So does the practitioner of meditation. To meditate on oneself is to look deeply into yourself to discover who and what you are. Can you be honest with who you are? Can you see? My wife and I were just sharing last night during our pillow talk. It was a beautiful moment where both of us were saying independently. I was saying to her, I realize I'm a handful. I mean, I know I have gifts. I know I have strengths. I know I have resources. But I'm also a handful. I have anxiety. I can be angry and reactive. I cannot express my feelings. I'm really horrible at self-care sometimes. And so I take out a balloon payment of self-care, so to speak, where I act out and the people around me suffer. I love this idea that he teaches, that a good therapist is practicing meditation because they are looking and listening deeply to understand someone and to show them their nature. In other words, we take in what the client is saying and we show it back to them through the lens of love, really, through the lens of compassion, through a patient lens, through a non-judgmental lens, so that the person is able to see themselves more clearly. Like I mentioned before, the idea of radical acceptance is similar to Rumi's idea that the cure for the pain is in the pain. We have to go into it. When it comes to impermanence, Rilke has a line from a poem that says, let everything happen to you, beauty and terror. Just keep going. No feeling is final. That's that idea in psychotherapy that I talk about when I train therapists. Just encourage your clients to keep going. When all is lost, when they don't know where to go, just tell them to keep going and remind them that they don't have to go alone, that you'll walk beside them. Thich Nhat Hanh said in his lectures, sometimes when we are sad, we lose contact with the fact that we are more than our sadness. Right? It becomes everything. It clouds everything. We think we are depressed. We think we are sad, and we're more than those things. We are, in essence, the one that is listening and observing the sadness, observing the depression. The philosopher Charles Eisenstein talks about this idea of interbeing. In Buddhism, there's this idea of a non-self, and Thich Nhat Hanh challenges that idea, that there's no real such thing as a self. And I won't get into all the ideas around it, but I love this idea of interbeing that both Thich Nhat Hanh talk about and Charles Eisenstein talks about. Charles Eisenstein writes in one of his books, he says, the fundamental precept of the new story is that we are inseparate from the universe, and our being partakes in the being of everyone and everything else. Why should we believe this? Let's start with the obvious, he suggests. This interbeing is something we can feel. Why does it hurt when we hear of another person coming to harm? Why, when we read of mass die-offs of the coral reefs and see their bleached skeletons, do we feel like we've sustained a blow? It is because it is literally happening to ourselves, to our extended selves. When you come to know yourself, you recognize yourself in everybody else. When you come to listen, to know yourself, to look upon yourself with love and compassion, you have love and compassion for everybody else. When you are judgmental and impatient with somebody else, it's telling you about some part of yourself that you haven't quite fully come to terms with. The war, the battle that you feel towards and with other people is emblematic of the battle that you have with yourself. I see this in our groups all the time with young people. Early letters often say from young people, they say things like, you know, you can't believe the other kids that are here. Everybody else has worse issues than I do. And they tell specific stories, usually exaggerated stories, to their parents. But the ones who take in the therapy, a few weeks later, will say something very different. They'll say, you know, even to the person sitting next to them, I didn't steal drugs, prescription drugs from my grandmother. I didn't do what you did. I was more depressed. I was more dishonest. I was more this or that. But we're the same. We both didn't want to feel. We both didn't want to deal with it. We had different ways of coping with our pain, but we're more the same than we are different. One master taught this when he was asked, how are we to treat others? I actually have that on the slide backwards. The student asked the master, how are we to treat others? And the master answers, there are no others. When you wake up and see yourself, that's why I say that if you don't have compassion for people that are suffering, you haven't learned self-love. And when you imagine that question that people sometimes ask of struggling individuals in their life, people struggling with mental health, they'll say things like their children, I don't get them. I don't understand. But once they've done the work, they say, I'm no different. I might be farther along on this journey, but I'm no different. I do the same thing. And you know what it feels like to be the recipient of that kind of energy? It feels like being seen and understood. It feels like being okay. It feels like attachment. Attachment in the psychological sense, not the Buddhist sense, and I'll talk about that in a minute. In terms of non-duality, there's a poem from Khalil Gibran that I really like on pain. He said, your pain is the breaking of the shell that encloses your understanding. Even as the stone of the fruit must break, that its heart may stand in the sun, so you must know pain. And could you keep your heart in wonder at the daily miracles of your life, your pain would not seem less wondrous than your joy. And when you accept the seasons of your heart, even as you have always accepted the seasons that pass over your fields, and you would watch with serenity through the winters of your grief, much of your pain is self-chosen. It is the bitter potion by which the physician within you heals your sick self. Therefore, trust the physician and drink his remedy in silence and tranquility. For his hand, though heavy and hard, is guided by the tender hand of the unseen. And the cup he brings, though it burn your lips, has been fashioned of the clay which the potter has moistened with his own sacred tears. We can't cut off the pain. If we do, we cut off the joy. That's the problem with substances. That's the problem with addictive behaviors, self-destructive compulsive behaviors? Is there an attempt to not be present with the feelings? And when we participate, when we practice compulsive behaviors that are self-destructive, they give us a temporary relief, but in the end, we're left more and more empty. I love his idea about relationships and mindfulness. He says if your love is making the other person, if your love is making the other person unhappy, it is not true love. To love someone, he explains, without knowing how to, excuse me, to love somebody without knowing how wounds the person that we love. I think that is a description of so many of the parents that I work with. To love without knowing how wounds the person that we love. Parents have a sense in themselves that they love their children as much as they're capable of loving, but then when they don't know how, it wounds the child. And they come to me wringing their hands and saying, I just don't understand why they're doing what they're doing. And I'm patient with that. But eventually I say, it is your job to understand they are no different than me. They are no different than you. And I explain the idea that Thich Nhat Hanh talks about. If you can't love them if you don't understand them. If you don't understand your child, your partner, your friend, your parent, you can't love them. Your love can only go as deeply as you understand them. Otherwise, it's not them you're seeing. You're seeing a projection. You're seeing a fantasy. You're seeing a part of them. The practice of the therapist, he explains, should be directed at themselves first. What that means is it's the same thing in attachment-based therapy. The foundation of the work that I do as a therapist is my work. That's why I teach therapists, new therapists all the time. If you want to be a great therapist, go to therapy. I've never seen a gifted therapist who hasn't invested a tremendous amount of time and energy in their own therapeutic healing. You can only bring people as far as you've gone. You can only meet people at the level of your own consciousness. One of my awarenesses in 2024 is at a felt level, at a felt sense level, that when I put myself out into the world and people can't respond to it, it's because they can only see me at their level of consciousness. So the practice of parenting skills, the practice of couple skills is to change you, not your partner, not your child. Parenting skills change parents, not children. And that change in a parent can have an amazing impact on people. But if you keep thinking about parent education and parent skills as give me the tools to change my child, you're like Alan Watts, you're asking the question persistently in a way that doesn't make any sense. Look for a therapist who's happy in their own life. I had a daughter one time during a family session when her parents were literally and figuratively wringing their hands with anxiety about the daughter's future, about her preparation for school, about the work that she had done at Evoke, the whole story. And they were expressing what they thought was love, or they thought it was at least in the context of love. And it was their worry and their anxiety about their daughter's future. And she simply said calmly after listening to them, tell me what you know about happiness. And I about fell out of my chair because the parents knew nothing about it. Because the only thing that they were saying to their daughter is, we can't be happy unless you change, unless you get better, unless you're better prepared, unless you're okay. And that is simply too great of a burden for a child to bear. So what are the take-home messages of Thich Nhat Hanh's teachings and this book? Develop a practice. Develop a practice of working on yourself. You're a handful. You're gifted. You have love to give. You have resources. You have wisdom. You have specific talents that this world needs. And you have stuff. You have crap. You have all of it. That's what mindfulness teaches us. It teaches us to see all of it. One of my favorite professors, my first professor in graduate school, had this beautiful eagle sitting up on one of her shelves, carved out of wood. It was amazing. And I commented on it one day, and she turned it around so I could see the back of it. And it was gnarled natural wood in the back. And she said, I keep that in my office to remind myself of the non-duality, of the wholeness that we often miss. See, we spend too much time talking about the bright and the pretty and the talented and the successful parts. We grow up in homes where we get attention for those things, and we develop this narcissistic wound that what I'm loved for. We conflate admiration and love. So the antidote for the narcissistic wound, that defensiveness, that needing to be good, not apologizing, never making a mistake, the antidote for that is to see and love all of the child. That moment when Jean Valjean is given the candlesticks by the bishop in Les Mis, that's the moment I'm talking about. The moment when you tell your therapist or your Al-Anon sponsor or your AA sponsor about something you did that was just absolutely horrible and unkind and selfish to somebody, and they regard you with love and compassion. They say, you're in the right place. You're okay. At the end of the movie, Two Popes, where the outgoing Pope, this is supposed to be based on a somewhat of a real story, where the outgoing Pope was transitioning to the incoming Pope. Anthony Hopkins was the outgoing Pope. And the incoming Pope took the confession of the outgoing Pope. And the outgoing Pope admitted that he knew about the child abuse and that he was aware of the cover-up. And the incoming Pope was absolutely overwhelmed, but took his confession. Those are the moments. And it's so hard. You know, the problem with these moments of forgiveness, it means that we have to feel our pain. It means we have to feel all of it. Develop a practice, go to therapy, go to 12 steps, go to an intensive, listen to podcasts, sit with yourself long enough until you can see yourself clearly. As it says in the letters of Juliet, look into the water until you can see yourself clearly. And the best way to help your children is to embody the joy that you wish for them. You know that old saying that sometimes is quoted by Gandhi that says, be the change that you wish to see in the world? That's what that means. You want your spouse to do their work? Go do your work until you are full of joy, until they want more of what you have. You want your children to be happy? Show them that you know how to have joy and peace and serenity. I read a book years ago called Living Your Yoga. It's this idea that yoga is not just something we do. It's not just an exercise. It's a practice. That are worshiping, that are listening to podcasts, that all the things that we do are to focus on a way of being. Deepak Chopra says, pick any mythological being and focus on it. And watch how you are transformed. Watch how you become more like that being that you are focusing on, that you are worshiping. Thich Nhat Hanh says that the first goal in mindful breathing, which is just the simplest meditation to go back to the breath, that the first goal in mindful breathing is to be in touch with the breath. And the second purpose in mindful breathing is to be in touch with life. You've heard many times to embrace the journey, that this is not a destination, it's about the journey. There's no way to joy, he says. Joy is the way. If you walk to arrive, you are missing life. So if you think you're off track right now, if you're struggling, and I would have compassion, I would sit and I would listen to you. But I'm not sitting and listening to you. I'm teaching right now. If you have that pain, if you have that struggle, it's a part of your journey. What's it here to teach you? What's it here to show you? And evoke therapy programs, in fact, the name of evoke therapy is the idea that he talks about in the book, that the goal in psychotherapy is to give birth to the therapist inside of the client. I just wanted to kind of end with this one idea too, that attachment in psychology, when I talk about attachment or secure attachment, it is synonymous with what the Buddhists call non-attachment. So that's the one language issue that happens in this work, is when somebody's talking about non-attachment, about not being attached to the outcomes, not being attached to an idea, not being attached to being happy all the time. Viktor Frankl says the surest way to suffer is to try to be happy all the time. That's inherent in what psychologists refer to as attachment, a secure attachment. All right. You want to do more of this? Go to any of the following 12-step support groups: Al-Anon, CODA, Families Anonymous, or Adult Children. You can also go to Refuge Recovery, which is a Buddhist-inspired recovery program, and the National Alliance on Mental Illness. We have recently partnered with Other Parents Like Me, OPLM. If you would like to have a free month membership, premium membership, you can use the code FINDINGYOU for a free month membership. My 2 books, The Journey of the Heroic Parent and The Audacity to Be You, are available on Amazon. They are based somewhat on attachment theory and Buddhism that leaks into it. And there's some quotes from Thich Nhat Hanh because there's so many parallels. You can use the QR code, go to Amazon, or go to our website to learn more. If you want to do an intensive, like I said, July 24th is the next one. We also have an online one, July 12th through 14th. And I will be in New York City, July 31st through August 4th. So you can plan a vacation or a trip, or if you're in the tri-state area. That will be the only Finding You workshop that I'll be doing in 2024. And then my wife and I will be doing the Finding Connection workshop. There's one spot for one couple left. And that's in September 25th through 29th. So that's like a Finding You for couples. You can also do custom couples or family Finding Yous. Just email us at intensives@evoketherapy.com, use the QR code, or go to our website. We have support groups for current families. The next one is this evening in just a few minutes, 7 p.m. Once a month, we have an alumni only. July 15th is the next offering at 6 p.m. Mountain Time. And then for our intensives and coaching alumni and current clients, July 8th is your next support group at 6 p.m. Contact support groups at evoketherapy.com or go to our website to find out more. If you would like a coach, you can email coaching@evoketherapy.com to be matched up with a coach that is educated in attachment-based therapy, and you can find one that's a good match for you. All of these broadcasts are available on Spotify or your favorite podcast app. Just search Finding You at Evoke Therapy Podcast, or you can go to soundcloud.com and listen to us there by searching for Finding You. You can also watch the video rebroadcast of these on Evoke's YouTube channel. You can find Evoke Therapy programs and me, Dr. Brad Reedy, on X, Threads, and Instagram using the handles @EvokeTherapy and @Dr. Brad Reedy, respectively. And then, of course, the Evoke Intensives has an Instagram account. Just search Evoke Therapy Intensives. You can find us on Facebook by searching Evoke Therapy programs or Evoke Therapy Intensives. And then our blog has wonderful content. Next Tuesday, I'll be hosting the Q&A. You can bring family and friends to that. If you have questions always in between, you can email us at webinar@evoketherapy.com. You can always send in suggestions, request slides. Even though there were lots of typos on tonight's slides, you can request the copies of the slides. Anything related to these broadcasts, you can connect with us via the email webinar@evoketherapy.com. I hope this was a helpful point of contact for you this evening. And as always, for on behalf of the people that you love and the people that love you, thank you for showing up. Thank you for being willing to do your work. It makes all the difference in the world. Have a great evening, and I'll talk to you Tuesday. Bye-bye.